I got a really good question recently, and I wanted to share this in a video for a couple of reasons. Number one, it helps to illustrate some really foundational, essential concepts when it comes to spending in retirement. And the other thing is it essentially shows you that we don't learn this stuff in school, so it's a very reasonable question. Now, some of you are going to know the answer right away, but as we go through the example, I think it may highlight a few things that you find interesting. And if you want to ask a question, check the description for a link. That's going to be the best place to submit those questions. Please don't email them, and I might answer them in a video like this. So the person essentially asked, they had heard about the 4% rule. And by the way, this is not a video about the 4% rule, but we will go over exactly how it looks, and then we'll go over something that's probably more realistic for a lot of people. But the question was, they had heard that you might spend using the 4% rule, which is not a rule, it's a research finding, and nobody actually uses it, but they had heard you might spend $20,000 per year if you had $500,000 saved for retirement. Now, if you consider a 30-year time frame, that would be a total of $600,000. So I have the world's most simple model of retirement here, and we do have that $20,000 of spending, and it's totaled up here. So we have a number of years, year 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., and that goes on for 30 years. And if you add that up and you just spend $20,000 per year, you do indeed spend $600,000. So how is that going to work if you start with $500,000? Well, as you may know, the idea is that you will probably earn something on your investments. Even if it's sitting in cash in a bank account, it'll get something. So a first step here might be to assume that you get some earnings. So we're going to put in 5% here. And what happens is we're going to go box by box here. In year one, you start with $500,000. That's our assumed starting amount. You take out the amount you wanted. That's $20,000 in this case at the beginning of the year, just to keep things simple. Then you've got $480,000 because you had $500,000 minus the $20,000. You get an investment return of 5% on that $480,000. That's $24,000. And then you end the year with $504,000. So even though you took, in this case, $20,000, you end up with a little bit more at the end of the year. And that can potentially keep on going for a little while, especially if there is no inflation. So inflation is a reality that we probably need to take into account. But to just briefly answer the person's question, so if you have some sort of earnings in here, and let's just say it's even 1% or something like that, we can find out if that's going to even be enough. You would actually run out almost exactly at year 30. I didn't even plan that. But if you have some sort of earnings on your money over those years, it is likely that you would be able to spend more than the amount you start with. And that's because you're hopefully going to earn something. So let's just assume 5% here. And then realistically, what ends up happening is you might have some inflation. So let's just say 3% inflation here. And here's where we really get into an example, if you're curious, of how that 4% rule actually works. So the way that works is they take the $20,000 or the 4% starting withdrawal amount, and then you just apply inflation to it. So in this case, what happens is in all of these subsequent years, all we're doing is adding 3% to the number above it. So 20,000 became 20,600. Then we add 3% the following year. So essentially, we're not even looking at what the beginning balance is each year. We're completely ignoring that. We're just going to add an inflation adjustment. And you can see that the actual or the effective withdrawal rate actually increases each year because, again, you've just ignored whatever you have and you're saying, I just want to keep up with inflation. To make this even more realistic, we might say, well, and you don't necessarily make money each year. In fact, you're almost certainly going to lose money in certain years. You might or might not recover quickly enough before you need the money. So the old sequence of returns problem that you've probably heard, let's say there's a 10% loss. I'm just going to say negative 50,000 is the investment return here. So you have a nice drop off of what your account balance is. And you can see that those withdrawal rates kind of jump up significantly here. And do you make it to 30 years? Well, in that case, no, you don't. So, what happens with a lot of people is if you have this big loss early in retirement, that can certainly hurt things. So what might realistically happen is if you did have a big loss and you notice a big drop off in your account balances, you're starting to withdraw at a higher rate, and you know this is early in retirement, which is when this is most important, you might decide after that big loss to maybe tighten the belt a little bit. So you're only going to spend $18,000 that year, and we'll see, did that solve the problem? Yes, it did. And maybe after a couple years, you want to get back on track. So let's say 22,500 is what you're going to start spending, negative 22,500. You don't get that as income. And once again, that did just let you squeak through retirement by cutting your spending for a couple of years after a big market drawdown. That's something that you can develop a system for. That can be guardrails. Or if you're like a lot of people, you just kind of eyeball it and do what you feel. Although it is best to run some numbers so that you know if you're cutting it enough, or you don't want to cut it too much, right? We want you to be able to spend and enjoy yourself. Again, this is just an oversimplified model. Now, when I use software with clients, it's not a basic spreadsheet like this. It's typically some combination of spreadsheets and maybe more robust financial planning tools. And that way you can cover a lot more ground. You can figure out what the taxes are going to look like each year, for example, and you can look at different pieces that might interact with each other. So if your income gets above certain levels, it may affect how much you pay for Medicare or how much of your Social Security gets pulled into your taxable income. So you really do want to do something more robust than this, but hopefully this is painting a picture for you. And then, there's also the question, and I've got videos on all of this, about the reality of how people spend. So we might assume that you're just going to increase your spending in lockstep with inflation. But the reality for a lot of people is a couple of different things. One is what's called the retirement spending smile. And that's where a lot of people increase their spending at something closer to inflation minus 1%. And that's because, you might have your house paid off at some point in retirement, and other inflation factors don't necessarily hit you as hard as people in their working years. The other one that people hear about a lot and kind of resonates is those go, slow go, and then no-go years. So you might say, for the first 10 or 15 years, we're gonna spend pretty nicely, and then at some point we might cut spending by about 10%. So reduce that just a bit, and then that could maybe help you endure a market crash early in retirement. And then maybe you even cut your spending again after, 24 years or something like that. So another 10% cut here. Just kind of eyeballing these figures, not doing anything scientific, but those are the types of things that can help a plan look a little bit better if we look at, again, the reality, and this is based on research of how people spend. So we've answered the question of, how do you spend 600,000 or more? If you just start with 500,000. So we've answered that question, and we've gone over a couple of other pieces. So I hope you found this helpful. If you did, please leave a quick thumbs up. Thank you, and take care.